Welcome to the Remembering a Life podcast. I'm your host, Holly Ignatowski, and today we're talking with Dominic Carella, soon-to-be managing partner of Donahue Cesare Funeral Home in Westbury, New York, and one of the first funeral directors to arrive at Ground Zero following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. In the months that followed, he would serve more than 75 families who experienced the devastating loss of a loved one that day. Today, we're going to hear his story. Welcome, Dominic, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning, and thank you.
Can you walk us through the morning of September 11th, 2001, Dominic? How did your day begin?
It was a normal day for me, up at 5, an hour and a half commute into New York City. Start my work day at 7:30 in the morning. It just was, I'll never forget, seemed like a beautiful fall day outside. You know, skies were clear. It was a great ride into the city. And it was somewhat of a slow day for us at the funeral home. We only had one service. We had a number of people that were still on vacation, so we were a little short-staffed. But the day just started out as any normal day in New York City would. And, you know, very simple and very basic.
So you were already driving into the city. When did you first learn that the World Trade Center had been hit by a plane?
Well, I was already in the city. I was already in my office, and we had got word that something happened at the World Trade Center. And it was about maybe 8:30, something like that in the morning, maybe 8:45. And we put the radio on, and, you know, they said that looks like a small plane might have hit the World Trade Center. And, you know, that part of New York City, they had the banner flights that carry the banners and so forth. So we all said the same thing in the office, so it must be one of those planes that carry the ads, and, you know, they'll take care of it. And then they started talking about the fire on the radio, that it looked much larger, and it was increasing as far as, you know, the amount of fire. And we noticed a lot of activity with the fire and police department. Now, we're on the Upper East Side, so there was quite a distance between Upper East Side and downtown Manhattan as far as distance. And we said that's kind of odd that, you know, the guys from up here look like they're going down Fifth Avenue responding to the World Trade Center. But we didn't think anything of it. We went about our business. And with that said, you know, we were listening to the radio, and when we all looked at one another, and it was about, I'm going to say, probably about 20 minutes later, that a second plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And, you know, we all looked stunned at one another, and everyone said the same thing. This has to be some type of an attack, and something odd is going on. And we had no TV or anything, so we were just listening to the radio. And unfortunately, it was the second plane hitting the South Tower, only to find out probably about 20 minutes later after that, now a plane hit the Pentagon. So everybody was kind of just shocked and stunned. I think the first thought that came to everybody's mind were family and friends that were there. And you're basically helpless at that point. I mean, all you could do is listen, and it was difficult to make phone calls if you did have friends or family there to find out if they were okay, because cell phones were cut off pretty quick. And then we just started witnessing more and more fire, police, ambulances all coming from the Upper East Side, all heading downtown. And we just looked at one another and we said, you know, this is not good. At the same time, I had a funeral director coming back from Brooklyn who was on the Brooklyn Bridge coming back to Manhattan. And he called me, which it took him quite a while to get through, and said to me, you know, I'm going to turn around. He says, there's no way. He said, looks like they're going to close the bridge and head home. He lived in Staten Island. So he goes, but I could see the two towers are on fire. He goes, traffic's not moving, and, you know, there's just fire trucks passing me left and right. So I said, okay, not a problem, you know, go home, you know, be safe, call me when you get home. And then the day, you know, unfortunately, at that point, we all kind of just sat around in the office. There was not too much to do, and we were just listening to the horrific reports coming in on the radio.
As a funeral director, did you instinctively know that my services are going to be needed in this space during this attack? Did you go there on your own? Were you asked to travel there?
Yeah, no, to be honest with you, that never came to my mind, because New York City as one of the highest fire departments in the world and police departments. I knew if anybody can do it, they did it once before. The death part did not cross my mind. It was more, shock as far as, oh, my God, these poor people. And then it was like, okay, this is going to be the world's greatest rescue right now going on. So none of that crossed my mind probably until it was, I believe, almost an hour later at about 10 o'clock when the first tower went down. That's when we said, oh, my God, what's going to happen? You figure, I think at the time there might have been 50,000 working in each tower, even if half of them got out and half of them didn't. You're looking at a lot of death. We were just assuming, we were just small talking and trying to pass the time. It wasn't until later that day, it was probably about 4:30 in the afternoon, that I got two back-to-back phone calls, one from the mayor's office, who was Mayor Giuliani. One of his aides called me to say, Father Judge has passed away, and he was close friends with the mayor. We're going to want you to take care of things for us. And then the second phone call was with the Archdiocese, which I was basically their funeral director for the Cathedral of St. Patrick's. And they asked me to get down to the medical examiner as soon as possible so we can get Father Judge out of there and, start preparing. So without hesitation, myself and one of the funeral directors that I worked with for many years, Martin Colibus, said, let's get in the car, let's get down there and see what's going on, only to find out we only had one van, that it was with the gentleman who I sent to Brooklyn earlier. So we had the former president of the facility, Gene Schultz. He had a station wagon. So I immediately ran to his office and said, Gene, if I can borrow your car for an hour. Father Judge has passed away. We've been called upon. I need to get down to the medical examiner. So he said, sure, no problem. Took his keys, ran out of the office. Heading downtown, there was no traffic on the road, which is not normal for New York City. There was a lot of quietness in the car. Marty and I was still kind of in shock. And then the next part was just the devastation that we witnessed at the medical examiner, which it took hours down there. So that's a whole nother story. But, we arrived there, and it just was devastation all over. There was vans and cars, ambulances, I should say, that had deceased people in it. The medical examiner was shut down because they were kind of getting everything ready for the amount of people that were going to come in. And we were told, just stand off to the side, and once we know what's going on, we'll let you guys know. Long story short, we didn't get Father Judge until about 12:30 at night. So we were there from approximately 4:30 in the afternoon all the way to 12:30, which was fine. I was in no rush. I understood the circumstances. The sad part was that's when reality started sinking in, because we saw the number of deceased people that they had already picked up, whether it be off the street or they rescued and died. And then the medical examiners in between two hospitals, Bellevue and NYU, and we went to grab some water, and there was a whole bunch of doctors hanging out in the corner. They started talking to us. We started talking to them, and they were all trauma doctors, and they had nobody coming into the emergency room. With that said, we said, wow, this is just going to be crazy and out of control. And, unfortunately, as you know, over 3,000 people died. So it not that it was out of control, but it was just a very sad moment as a funeral director to kind of be there and live through that part of it.
Right. And Dominic, who was Father Judge?
Father Judge was the fire department chaplain for the entire New York City Fire Department. He was a Franciscan priest, very well known throughout the community in Lower Manhattan, and also served as their chaplain. So he developed a lot of relationships with the firefighters throughout his career, and even included in the New York City Police Department. Just a very genuine, very caring man. So anytime there was a large fire or emergency in New York City, he would respond and be there for support for the firefighters. So as he did with, a regular fire, he responded to the World Trade Center that particular day. unfortunately, winded up getting hit outside of the World Trade Center. He was in the courtyard. From what I understand, a brick had hit him in his head, and he was the first casualty of September 11th.
Hmm. That was an intense first day of the attacks. Tell us about your role at Ground Zero and how you were able to help these families. You helped a lot of families.
We did. New York City being so diverse, and the business, Frankie Campbell, that I worked for, being a very diverse and very well-known funeral home, a lot of people reached out to us because they thought we had most of the information over anyone else throughout the city. So, unfortunately, it was a lot of what I called stress phone calls where people just wanted to talk to someone and get answers. Not that the medical examiner wasn't sharing it, but he didn't have all the answers at the time as far as who was deceased and who was found and who was missing. And so it was a very challenging time for their staff there. And then families would call us saying, what do we do? How do we find out? So, I filtered most of the phone calls with my team there, and they did a great job as far as helping people just answer the basic questions. What's going to take place now? What do I do? And how do I move forward? So we thought, as probably most funeral homes did in New York, that we were going to be very busy in the first couple of days, which it was to a point with phone calls. But that was it. It was only phone calls because not a lot of people were found right away. So we were faced with the challenge of, okay, we have Father Judge. It's going to be a large-scale funeral. We don't know what else is going to come through the doors, but we hear there's other ones that were found and identified already, but there should be thousands more, not even hundreds, thousands. So, how are we going to tackle this? And the company did a great job. There was a gentleman by the name of Robert Budway who works at SCI, and he basically got a team together to help out funeral homes that would be overwhelmed with calls, and it was a great idea. It was wonderful for the locations, but most of us didn't need it because the volume was not there. So the calls came later on in the week and, of course, later on in the month, but it wasn't like we were hit. We serviced 75 families, but those 75 families were branched out over months. I mean, there was people that contacted us, made arrangements with us, and then we didn't find their loved one until 6 months later.
In many cases, you weren't able to recover, or they weren't able to recover, the remains of family members at all.
Correct.
How were you able to help them find closure and say goodbye in that case?
Well, that was the importance of memorializing someone. And, we were always on the front lines of it throughout cremation programs that we had and burial programs and things to that nature. But, I said to my staff at the time, we have to give them every option no matter what, whether it's a full body or whether it's an inch part of a bone. It's still their loved one, and that's all they have. So whether it's an everyday worker, whether it's a firefighter, they're entitled to have the service that warrants their life, basically, how they live their life. And don't say, well, it's only a finger or it's only a hand. It's all they had, which was so important to the people, because there was some that had none. And that was the sad part. People would come to you and say, I have nothing. So there was funerals, with caskets, and there was funerals with tens of thousands of people. And I know what was in there. Some of the family knew that was in that casket, and that didn't matter to them. What mattered to them was they were representing their loved one and the life that they lived and being memorialized the way they thought was best fitting. And I have to tell you, it not from a point of revenue or anything like that. I don't care if people wanted something simple, they wanted something elaborate. The important part was to memorialize their loved one in a certain way. Certain people didn't think you can go to church. Certain people didn't think you can have a burial. And it was so important because after the fact that a family wrote you a letter or made a phone call, you realized how much you helped them through the process.
Right. And as a funeral director, you're used to dealing with sadness and grief on a daily basis, but never on this scale. How were you able to maintain your own composure and deal with your own grief through this process?
It was difficult. It's probably the first time that I broke down with families, which it's okay to cry as a funeral director. You know, we always have this guard up that you can't cry, you can't show emotions. If you look at some photos of me on Google for some of these big funerals, I'm holding on to a wife and there's tears coming down my eyes. And I said to myself one day, I said, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I normally would break down at nighttime where I would leave the funeral home, probably work a 12, 15-hour day, and just take the long ride home. And that was my moment to have to myself and cry, get home, hug and kiss my kids, and start the day all over again the next day. So I grieved with them. I cried with them. As I told some people earlier in the funeral home, it's okay. You know, it's okay to grieve with them. It's okay to break down. Yes, we're their main support. But these circumstances were so unique that you had no choice, and I didn't stop, and I would never stop anyone from holding back their emotions.
Right. No doubt this had a profound effect on you, and I would imagine you still think about some of these families and maybe even keep in touch with some of these families. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about that experience?
I mean, it was a moment in time that I will never forget. You know, I relate to not only the people that I buried, but friends that I knew or people that knew of people that died. So I relate to the whole tragic circumstances, including the Pentagon and Pennsylvania, all as one, and including the soldiers that are still fighting for this country. So I hold it dear to my heart. I do have my moments throughout the year, especially on 9/11, where, you know, you'll see the reports, you'll hear the readings of the names, so you can relate to the people that you helped and the people that you knew of and the stories behind certain people. So it's a very, very, very difficult time. And like I said, we're all human. We all break down. And one thing I will share with you is if anyone out there listening has not been to the memorial there, you must go to that memorial. It is the most touching memorial that has ever been created, truly tells the story, and I didn't realize how much of an impact it had on me when I took my family there, my wife and my two kids, and my kids were young at the time, so now that they were in their 20s, they appreciated it, they knew the story more, they saw where I stood, you know, in the midst of everything and how I helped certain families. And I got to tell you, very, very powerful, very, you know, talk about making an impact. It's quite a unique museum to visit.
Dominic, who are you remembering today?
I'm remembering everyone out there. You know, there's certain families that pop right into my head that, you know, I can rattle off their names, which I don't do only because, you know, there were some funerals that were held in confidentiality agreements that we had with the families, but some hold true very close to my heart that I still keep in touch with. But I remember every single victim, every single firefighter that fought, every police officer that fought, every steel worker that was down there, every soldier. I have a soft spot in my heart for everyone that was involved, and including the funeral directors. You know, we're always the last ones to be thanked, and that's okay. We don't need to be on the front lines, but not only myself, but I know there's hundreds of ladies and guys that were out there day and night and helping families in their communities and in their states, not only New York, but New Jersey and Connecticut. And, you know, I think of them too, and everyone just came together as one, did what was best, and no one should ever be forgotten. Whatever role they played, they should always be remembered.
Thank you for joining me today, Dominic, and for sharing your very moving experience and stories. Thank you for everything you did to serve families on September 11th, 2001, and what you and your profession do on a daily basis. It is truly profound, and we thank you for that.
Great, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it.
And thank you for joining me today. To share your own memories and reflections about the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, visit rememberingalife.com/share your story.